Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from The Crown of Thorns, out October 11th on Metal Blade Records. The album has 13 tracks, 3 of those are bonus tracks, and it's 55 minutes in length. This is the band's 12th full-length studio album, and they are a Swedish melodic death metal band. Normally, when I get a record like this, with 13 songs, regardless if 3 are bonuses or not, and it's 55 minutes in length, I sit here and I complain about the overall length of the album being a little bit exhausting, stretching the album too much, thinning out the quality of the record, and even perhaps making the experience a little bit cumbersome. Now, that's not the case with this record. I felt like for an album that is very cohesive, that it's very balanced, that it's very compact, they made a great job of it in terms of how much movement it has, how fluid it is, how dynamic it is, and how engaging the overall experience comes across. And it all comes down to the quality of the individual tracks. This is an album that doesn't dip in quality at any given point. Is as strong at the beginning as it is in the middle, as it is in the end. So having that balanced quality throughout the album, creating certain texture and nuances within that texture from song to song, which makes the tracks feel slightly different while still staying very connected with the overall genre that brings them together, allows this album to have this duality within it that makes, like I said, the experience balanced and cohesive, but overall makes the album move a lot faster than what the actual length of the record really is. And that is the winning formula for an album like this. You have to create consistent quality, you can't have any dips, and you can definitely not change or allow for a certain growth or evolution of the record as the record progresses, because that's always going to create a sense of division, and you're going to feel one way towards the first half of the record and a different way towards the second half of the album. This record does not give you that ability, and that design really gives strength to what the overall collective is all about. Now, once it comes down to the sound on this album, I found this album to be very intriguing, because when I'm listening to this record, on one hand, I can see the Swedish melodic death metal sound, that old school Swedish melodic death metal sound, coming through on almost every single song. But I also saw a more modern production style behind it. Not a throwback sound, but a throwback execution with a more modern sound. And then on top of that, I found the songs to be very narrow and very concise in terms of the heaviness and in terms of the sound that they provided. Much different from what you're getting currently from Swedish or otherwise melodic death metal bands, which they create a little bit more atmosphere in their sound. The melodic side of their sound overshadows sometimes the heaviness of their music, which gives size to the songs, makes the songs feel a lot bigger, a lot wider, but it takes away from that punch, it takes away from that aggression, and it definitely takes away from the intensity of the record. So these guys were able to keep the aggression, the intensity that you get on a death metal album, which allows the songs, like I said, to be to feel a little bit more narrow, a little bit more concise, a little bit more straight to the point, still infusing old school melodic death metal elements that allows the melody to break through some of that thickness, some of that heaviness, some of those walls. And then on top of that, you give it a more modern production, which allows you to better digest everything that the album is giving you. It allows you a better way of seeing the impact of the bass, of the guitars, the drums, the vocals. You're much better equipped to handle a record that still has a lot of heaviness and has a lot of thickness within that heaviness, but still has the melody that breaks it ever so softly and makes you be able to see behind the curtain. So it's the great DNA of this album, the ability to bring these 3 elements that they're all connected with death metal together to create an album that almost has a very unique sonic experience from that standpoint. Because when you listen to this album, based on the sound of the record, certain songs are pure melodic death metal songs, then certain tracks are more traditional death metal tracks, and then some are a complete hybrid, where the verses is one and the chorus is the other. But regardless of which one you're listening to, you always have this sense of narrowness, but also melodic output that breaks down some of that narrow experience that the songs have. So really interesting overall sound experience behind this record, something that definitely stands out and is very consistent from the beginning of the album all the way to the end, as is the quality, as I mentioned before. Now, within that sound, 3 elements I want to mention, and that is the bass, guitars, and drums. The bass on this record while not being necessarily in the forefront, while not playing an incredible role as far as what drives the soundscape of the record, the fact that it peaks in certain songs and in certain moments of songs, I think it's really important because it adds a little bit of a throwback experience. It adds a little bit more roughness. It gives the sound a little bit more of a death metal, old school death metal experience because of how rugged the tracks become when that bass pops in. And I thought that was a really good element, used wisely, not overused, but used wisely in the mix, allowing it to pop, allowing it to go back into the track, come a little bit out, but always giving great texture to the overall sound. Then you have the drums. The drums on this album are not static. They're not in one place in the mix. They actually have quite a bit of movement. And when you listen to the record on headphones, you can hear that movement from the drums, which I think adds to the overall movement of the album. And if you don't have that movement on the drum sound, the songs would sound even more narrow. The songs would sound that they were even more compact, that they didn't have a lot of room, and then the melodic output of the guitars would not have the ability to break through that heaviness, that thickness, that narrowness the way that it currently does. So the drums do a great job on creating heaviness, spreading it around, but not overshadowing to a point where the guitars would not have the current impact that they do, specifically on the melodic side, because the guitars on the melodic side on this record have some incredible riffs. This album has really catchy and hooky melodies that don't take anything away from how heavy the album is. They were able to combine the two, create a very heavy sounding record guitar wise, but still infuse those melodies that kind of break that heaviness ever so slightly. Also has great guitar solos, so it's an album that has a lot to offer guitar wise, but as you would expect from a band like The Crown. Now vocally, the album is very consistent. Outside of a few changes, a few nuances here and there, the album is very consistent in its vocal output, and I like that because it was always a way of bringing the tracks back to a place of aggression, to bringing it to a place of safety, because you're not worried about changes musically to the tracks and how those musical changes are going to impact the vocal performance, because you start to feel like the record is always going to stay on track vocally. Like I said, outside of a few things here and there, it's an album that stays very consistent, but that consistency adds value to the record, adds value to the songs, and definitely brings or emphasizes a lot of the brutality and heaviness that this album has, but even some darkness. There are some songs where the melodic side of the tracks offers dark undertones, and the vocal performance does a great job adding to that overall darkness, because the roughness around the vocals have already that built-in darkness to them, so that just enhances the overall darkness of the sound. Specifically with songs that really push that envelope, it becomes a lot more clear what they're all about. So this is a consistent, great album with great quality, super fun album to listen to. I really enjoyed the experience, and for a record that goes 55 minutes, you're not going to hear me complain about it, because it was great music all the way through. And when you have great tracks, it becomes a lot more enjoyable. There's a lot less room for you to feel bored by it. This album did not bore me. This album had great experience, great sound. They were able to blend in these experiences of more straightforward death metal with more melodic death metal, and like I said, with that more modern production, really sets this album apart and creates a great listening experience for the fans of the band and of the genre. Now, as far as favorite songs goes, I want to start off with I Hunt with the Devil. This is the opening track on the album, and it brings that more traditional death metal sound experience. It's a track that is heavy, that is thick, that is compact, and that is direct, something that you're going to see throughout the record with more or less predominance. But this track opening up the album, it really sets the expectations, or at least it sets a little bit of what this album is going to be all about, because you see a lot of the elements on this track then kind of bleed through what the rest of the album is going to offer. It creates this wall of sound. It has the drums that define that wall of sound, and then it allows the guitars to be the ones that create the more texture, to create the nuances, but never really taking away from that overall heaviness. The chorus on this track is super hooky. Vocally, it sounds great, and it's very catchy on how the vocals come across in the chorus and how it's delivered. It's not every day that you hear a record that is this heavy, especially a death metal album or even a melodic death metal album, where the vocals play this kind of a role in creating so many hooks when it comes to the choruses. It's also a track that has a great solo. I love the solos on this track. They have great life, great energy, and it's a throwback song that hits hard. It's a hard-hitting throwback death metal song with some glimpses of melodic death metal infused in it. Then we have the Martyrian. Now, this is my favorite song on the entire album. The moment I listened to this record, this track completely, poked its head out, and I took notice to it. It's a great song. I love the heaviness. I love how thick it is. But it has a melodic side that has room to exist, that surfaces specifically when it comes in the chorus. In the verses, it's a more traditional, compact death metal song that just takes you from point A to point B in the shortest distance possible. But now, once you get into the chorus, then you get this incredibly melodic riff that takes over the song, and it becomes the calling card of the track. Not to say that the vocals don't play a role in making that riff work really well in the chorus, but honestly, the riff almost surpasses the vocals in terms of how memorable it is, and the impact that it has on the track is undeniable. The vocals do help this song with its intensity and its aggression, but it's a song that's really driven, and it has that calling card, that fingerprint riff in the chorus, and that melody is what sets this track apart. Last but not least, Gone to Hell, another track that depends a lot on the melodic side in order to work. But this one, the melodic side of the track, brings almost a dark goth vibe into the song, which is something, it's a very different atmosphere in this track, even though you can see a lot of resemblances between this song and other tracks in terms of the sound, in terms of how the track is put together. That melodic side of the song, of the guitars, does infuse this dark goth undertone into the song that becomes a little bit of a unique atmosphere within this track, helping it set itself apart of the others, but not completely going different from everything else that you're going to hear on the album. Just the vibe of the song changes. The approach, the mechanisms are all the same, but the vibe of the song is very different from that perspective, and that allows the track to be memorable. It's very memorable musically, it's very memorable vocally, it has a lot to offer, but it still has that old school death metal direct approach, very compact and concise in the way that it's constructed, in the way that it's presented. This is it, The Crown of Thorns, on October 11th on Metal Blade Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles, hit me up in the comment section. I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, guys.